ladies and gentlemen, our chief guest, Honorable Minister Namal Rajapaksa, keynote speaker, and all the participants on behalf of SLSI. It's a warm welcome to the webinar organized by the Sri Lanka Standards Institution to commemorate the World Standard Day 2021. World Standard Day is an annual event celebrated internationally each year on 14th October since 1970. The main intention of this webinar is to provide insight into the theme of this year's World Standard Day. World Standard Day 2021 is about shared vision for a better world. According to today's agenda, the first item is the welcome address. So I would like to invite a dynamic personnel to deliver the welcome speech, who is a doctor by profession and giving his leadership towards the vision of SLSI. I'd like to invite Dr. Nihal Jayatilaka, Chairman of SLSI, to deliver the welcome speech.
Good morning, everybody. Honorable Namal Rajapaksa, Minister of Youth and Sports, Minister of Development Coordination and Monitoring, and a State Minister for Technology and Entrepreneurial Development. Mr. Jayanta De Silva, Secretary to the Ministry of Technology. Professor Aditya Alves, Dean, Faculty of Graduate Studies, University of Moratuwa. Members of the Council of Sri Lanka Standards Institution, heads of other institutes, Director General of Sri Lanka Standards Institution, Dr. Sindhika Senaratne, Deputy Director Generals, Directors, and all the other officials at Sri Lanka Standards Institution. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Sri Lanka Standards Institution, may I take this opportunity to welcome all of you for the World Standard Day commemorate webinar. First of all, I warmly welcome our Minister Honorable Namal Rajapaksa for this webinar, and we are indeed very grateful to Honorable Minister for gracing this important event in SLI's calendar. I would also like to extend my warm welcome to Secretary to the Ministry of Technology, Mr. Jayanta De Silva. Professor Aditya Alves, I am honored and privileged to welcome you with great respect today for accepting our invitation to be the keynote speaker for this very important webinar to commemorate the World Standard Day. Sri Lanka Standards Institution is national standard body of Sri Lanka, established under Parliamentary Act and function as a semi-government organization. SLSI represents Sri Lanka at International Organizations for Standardization, or ISO. Main function of SLSI is to undertake, promote, and facilitate standardization, measurement, quality assurance, and related activities in all sectors in national economy. The Sustainable Development Goals address social imbalances, developing sustainable economy, and slowing the rate of climate change. Including Sri Lanka, 193 countries have officially adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals in year 2015, which are expected to be achieved by year 2030. This webinar will showcase the many ways in which international standards contribute to the success of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I hope this will create awareness as the stepping stone to contribute towards accomplishing the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nihal Jayatilaka, Chairman of SLSI, for delivering the welcome speech.
Honorable Namal Rajapaksa, Minister for Youth and Sports, Minister for Development Coordination and Monitoring, and State Minister for Digital Technology and Entrepreneur Development. Mr. Jayantha De Silva, Secretary, Minister of Technology. Professor Aditi Alves, Senior Professor and Dean of Faculty of Graduate Studies, University of Moratuwa. Chairman of Sri Lanka Standards Institution, Dr. Nihal Jayatilaka. Additional Secretaries to the Ministry of Technology. Members of the Council of Sri Lanka Standards Institution. Heads of other institutes. Deputy Directors General. Directors and all the other officials of Sri Lanka Standards Institution, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Every year, we celebrate World Standards Day, which falls on October 14th. As we all know by now, this year's theme is our shared vision for a better world to achieve sustainable development goals. The first time the world felt a need to bring in standardization was in the year 1946. So in 1946, October 14th to be precise, 65 well-known experts from 25 different countries first gathered in London and decided to create an international organization focused on facilitating standardization. The effort took off when the standardization entity's actual formation came into effect almost 12 months later in 1947, when the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, officially came into existence. International Electrotechnical Commission, or IEC, was formed in the year 1906. The organization is mainly concerned with the publication of international standards for the electrical and electronic industrial segments. All semiconductors, batteries, fiber optics, and solar energy devices get their standardization from IEC. International Telecommunication Union, or ITU, is mainly into regulating the telecommunication sector. Our mobile phone devices and networks, broadband types of equipment, satellites, meteorological establishments, internet, television networks, satellite systems, and navigation equipment all get their standardization from ITU. So ISO, in collaboration with the IEC and ITU, jointly celebrate World Standards Day each year. The first time World Standard Day was celebrated was on 14th of October 1970. Sri Lanka Standards Institution, or SLSI, is the national standards body in Sri Lanka. SLSI, by virtue of being the national standards body, is the member body of the ISO, which represents Sri Lanka. We talk about standards all the time. The use of standards in international and local trade and everyday life is now commonplace and well embedded, so much so that the socio-economic systems without standards are not conceivable. So the best way to explain standard is by pointing at problems that arise from their potential absence. I'll take a simple example. Take a square pin plug everybody is familiar with. You know, from whichever the shop we buy, whichever the brand we buy, they all have the same size, and all the socket outlets are also made to be compatible with them. That's because they are made for a standard. What if they are produced without using a standard? Then each plug will be different to each other. That means each plug will have to come with its own socket outlets. So our walls will be filled with having different socket outlets for each and every different electrical item. Just imagine the chaos standards have prevented in our day-to-day life. Imagine having credit cards produced with different dimensions. Then will they fit in to be used by one card reader? If that is the case, do you think use of credit cards would have seen the light of day? Imagine different laptops with different types of ports for flash drives. If not for standards, would such new inventions practically be of any use? International trade heavily depends on containers. Imagine the chaos it will create in ports if different countries made containers to different sizes disregarding standards. I think this is enough to show that standards are an important contributor to the advancement and sustainability of our world today. So we can say easily, standards are the key driver of economic growth. Therefore, economic growth in a country is directly related to the number of standards that are being used at a given time. There are many benefits of standardization for the private sector, public sector, and even to the consumers. The many benefits that standards bring to companies include reduction in production and transaction costs, increased market opportunities, competitive positioning, improved risk management, decreasing waste, reducing procurement cost, and increasing productivity. Therefore, standards have been used as the basis for developing new products, penetrating new markets, that is both domestic and export, supporting the market uptake of products, and even creating markets. By using standards, companies are positioning their business for the international market. International standards create a common language for potential trading partners and prove a business commitment to quality. This shows how standards are acting as the passport for trade. Therefore, I call upon all organizations, companies in Sri Lanka to join hands with the Sri Lanka Standards Institution and make use of many services offered by the institution to strengthen their prominence in the global market. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Siddhika Senaratne, Director General of SLSI, to address the gathering. Now, I'd like to introduce the next speaker to you. He has over 30 years experience in the IT industry with extensive exposure in the national policy making and strategies for knowledge services with hands-on experience in large projects. He was the chairman of ICTA Sri Lanka. On behalf of SLSI, it's my pleasure of inviting Mr. Jayant De Silva, Secretary to the Ministry of Technology, to address the gathering.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's so good to be with all of you on a very significant day for all of us, the World Standards Day. I think my previous speakers, Dr. Jayatilaka and Director General Siddhika, explained the importance and about the standards and the requirement for standards. So good morning again, Dr. Chairman SLSI, Director General Dr. Siddhika, distinguished guests, members of the Council of SLSI, and ladies and gentlemen. Me coming from a pure IT background in life, I've been associated with Sri Lanka Standards Institutions for the last 30 years. So I may take a bit of practical approach in regarding standards because Dr. Siddhika and Dr. Jayatilaka explained well about the importance of this event. 30 years ago, my company where I worked was concentrating in a lot of exports for software. People at that time didn't very well understood the importance of standards and also, of course, a byproduct quality very much. and how could we attribute or get integrated standards into a service, and especially a software, an untangible product or a solution. They found it easy when it came to tangible products, but software and service was a tough thing. But at that time, I came to SLSI and started discussing how they can help. And I'm pleased to say that we were the first in Sri Lanka to get the Standard Institute SLSI SLS certificate for my company where I worked. It really transformed the company from a small company. We went to huge exports, and we won the Presidential Export Award. Later on, in another company where I started working, I had stiff competition from the international world because software being a huge business today. So our standards were never accepted internationally. So in that context, I spent a huge amount of money and again got an international standard from another institution, and thereby changed the whole paradigm and whole thinking of the company I work. So you may see I'm taking a practical approach to explain the way the world will move. We are quite conversant, and we are quite good at standards where we can have tangible products that we can touch, feel, and sense. But the world would move heavily onto non-tangible or services, and the way we work would be very virtual. Standards will come in a very, very big way in this field. As Dr. Sidika explained, we are moving into that, and I'm quite pleased to hear that, and that we are going in that direction. But putting standards up would be a bit of a challenge for all of us, because in any product, most of the products that we sell, still people think it's only helps marketing. Unfortunately, in some of the big companies, the standards and the quality comes under a marketing person. It should not be so, because what it brings to us is much, much more than just marketing. Especially in the field that I work on the software solutions, you may run 1 billion times correctly, but only one incorrect thing that happens in a software, people will lose all the confidence, the trust that one would have on that solution. So today, it's extremely important that we bring standards, and thereby to a great extent of quality of products that we would be using and selling. Just to say, 2 things that I personally feel is trust that would bring through standards. It will bring a lot of trust, and also the trust becomes integrated and in relation to the organization which gives you the standards. And in Sri Lanka, it is SLSI. So we have a huge responsibility towards not only our customers, but also on our partners, the producers, the manufacturers. So we should work very closely. As you rightly said, shared vision for a better world, but we should also share our responsibilities and our vision, not only with the international world, but we have to share our vision and our knowledge and our responsibility with the consumers, the legislators, and the producers or the manufacturers. It's extremely important. And I'm surprised, and I'm also very pleased to note that most of the people have directly contacted us seeking quality standards very recently, because they know that quality standards and standards by SLSI goes a long way in the development of their company. It will bring a lot of discipline. From my experience, I'm saying the standards brought a lot of discipline, lot of predictability into the solutions that we produce, and we could go around the world with the standards. And I'm quite happy to say that the IT BPM industry especially is looking to SLSI and the standards, and we would be working with you very closely in the coming days. I, as the secretary, wish to thank SLSI for the great work that you are doing with limited resources, with huge, depending on our economic conditions of this country, you are doing a great work. And I personally am aware of it. And I thank the DG, the chairman, and all the people who are working at SLSI for doing a great job. And I wish to state that the government and the ministry would be with you and back you in your future endeavors. And I wish you all the very best in the coming years. Thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Jayant De Silva, Secretary to the Ministry of Technology, for address the virtual gathering. On behalf of SLSI, now I would like to invite our chief guest to address you all, who is a young, dynamic, energetic, and efficient personnel, and giving his leadership towards the sustainable development of the country. It is my pleasure on behalf of SLSI to invite the Honorable Namal Rajapaksa, Minister of Youth and Sports, Minister of Development Coordination and Monitoring, and State Minister of Digital Technology and Enterprise Development to enlighten the event.
Thank you very much, Secretary Mr. Jayant De Silva, Chairman Dr. Nihal, DG of SLSI, Dr. Siddika, all senior officials representing different ministries, head of state and private sector organizations, distinguished participants and friends. Very good morning to all of you. I consider being privileged to participate as a chief guest and honored to address this important event today to celebrate the World Standards Day. First of all, let me thank the chairman, Dr. Jayatilaka, DG, and all the members of SLSI team for inviting me for this gracious event. I think the theme, Shared Vision for a Better World, this year for the World Standards Day is appropriate and timely. All of us know that along with the other 192 member states of the United Nations, we too have adopted and endorsed the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. It was an universal call for action to end poverty, protect the planet, Earth, and ensure peace and prosperity to all people by 2030. Everybody agrees that all stakeholders need to jointly work together with a shared vision to accomplish these SDGs to achieve a better world and a planet. A shared vision and not only helps to keep all stakeholders groups together, it serves as a particular guide for developing plans, setting goals and objectives, coordinating, making decisions, and evaluating the progress. Despite all challenges inflicted on us by the COVID-19 pandemic, the government, under the leadership of His Excellency, the President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, is taking defined and sustainable effect to make progress towards achieving these SDGs. Vistas of prosperity and splendor, or Saubhagya Dakma, which is our national policy framework, is a comprehensive and holistic development framework that has effectively integrated our global SDG commitments. The three core areas, economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection, are comprehensively addressed in the national policy framework, and all institutions need to work together to achieve these objectives. We know that under the leadership of Excellency, the President being the Minister of Technology, and Interministerial Steering Committee has been established to develop a shared vision and to steer and guide implementation of SDG process in Sri Lanka. Mobilizing all responsible agencies will not only facilitate but also ensure integrated approach towards implementation. Sri Lanka has already begun its transformation towards a sustainable and resilient society. The scope of international standardization covers a wide range of international standards on air, water, and soil quality, gas emissions, and radiation, as well as environmental aspects of products to help preserve the environment and health of citizens. We know that SLSI formulate and publish national standards guiding to achieve sustainable development in according with the specifications stated in the SDG goals, while providing a number of other services such as product certification, system certification, training, collaboration, information service, and laboratory service to the nation, while inviting every organization in the country to join hands with SLSI to comply with national standards. I take this opportunity to thank all members of the Interministerial Steering Committee and congratulate Chairman, Council Directors, Council Director General, and all members of the team SLSI in their achievements to date. Wish you all success in all your endeavors in accomplishing shared vision for a better Sri Lanka by accomplishing all sustainable development goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Minister, for being present with us today and delivering this speech with encouraging thoughts. Even this is a very eventful period to you. Once again, we appreciate it very much. Thank you, sir. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing the keynote speaker to you. Professor Aditya Alvis completed his PhD at University of Cambridge, post completing his BSc Engineering Honours degree from University of Moratuwa. He also has an MBA from Postgraduate Institute of Management, BIM of University of Sri Jayawardenepura. He is a senior professor in the Department of Chemical and Process Engineering at the University of Moratuwa and was the former director of the University of Moratuwa Cargill's Food Processing Development Incubator. He was also a science team leader for Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology from its inception in 2008 to 2011. He served as the project director of Coordinating Secretariat for Science, Technology and Innovation. Also serves in the Intellectual Property Advisory Commission as a member and also served as in the governing council member of the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. He is a founding director of the Green Building Council of Sri Lanka and the founding president of Lanka Biogas Association. He is the chairman of National Mirror Committee on Environmental Management and member of Management System Certification Committees of SLSI. Currently, he serves as the Dean of Faculty of Graduate Studies, University of Moratuwa. He is also a regular columnist to the Daily FT on innovation, science, technology, and national development. Now, I have the pleasure of invite Professor Aditya Alvis.
Hi, Bohan. Thank you. Good morning. Honorable Minister, Chairman, SLSI, Dr. Siddhika, Director General of SLSI, and all of you who have joined in to looking at the world standards, celebrating the World Standards Day. May I now switch on to the slides? But it's first of all, thanks for the invitation it's important that we really celebrate this in the sense of realizing benefits coming out of the standards. And that's the kind of theme I opted in to present today, because we believe that we should seriously benefit from this. And there's a significant potential for Sri Lanka in elevating ourselves if we follow this approach. And that is the shared vision, basically, because we are exchanging understandings, the views, and it's up to us to make use of. And again, ourselves, we can contribute. So that's the expectation. So let me share a few thoughts with you. What we have been looking at in this celebrating today is really for standards for SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And we must remember we are in 2021, and the decade is in front of us today, starting from this year. And we'll be really challenged, seriously challenged, to ensure that we spend this decade in a very productive way if we are to come out of this, some of the problems that we have been facing, and somewhat also due to some of the activities that we ourselves have created. So it's a very responsible position that we are in, having to steer nations, steer the society, steer people, to enable them to overcome some of the problems and ensure that there is a future for the next generation. And to ensure that, we have to work. And it is on that we share these best practices and the global developments, and making them as tools for our own pathway in our own roadmaps, in developing our own roadmaps. So I kind of didn't go, shared vision for a better world is a theme. I kind of tweaked it to support, to make it more Sri Lankan and to get the message across. ISO and Sri Lanka with the best of the world, right? Now, the standards, I think the Secretary as well as the Director General mentioned the importance of standards. And from a company point of view, and also from the national point of view, the ideas were expressed. Now, how do we seriously realize this for this current situation and changing Sri Lanka to really benefit? And we also be part of, because we have our own abilities to deliver to the society in general. And so we just don't accept, we also adapt and accept as well as contribute and be part of this change, and this is important. So that's why this ISO, and the why is just to stress, when IPCC came up with this 3,000+ page report very recently, it actually was like titled Code Red for Humanity. That is announcing seriously that we must take action right now to ensure that we address the problems that are facing us. And if we don't, that there's serious trouble ahead. Planet is in peril. The society is in peril. And they were very strong this time with the statement from the IPCC report. And we see this across. The challenges are there on one side. We have to reduce the temperature rise. We have to reduce the temperature rise is not looking at temperature, but by looking at our activities. Because it's our activities that contributes to these emissions, which in turn results in this temperature rise. And across the world, we see these issues. I mean, from the recent past, if you look at from Canada, look at China, look at state of California, plus many more states in US, and look at Greece, look at Germany, Belgium, Siberia to Australia, we have seen events that are of serious magnitude. And to some extent, some of these countries being developed, or most of these countries having the ability to tackle, they were able to tackle some of these things, but yet it was a significant, I mean, like high magnitude. But the threat is these events are going to be so common if we don't change the way we work, change the way we carry on our development path. So that is the code red for humanity that IPCC was talking about. Now, how do we do that? I mean, the recipe, the roadmap is the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So very clear, very clear. And 2030, we're talking about, we have to achieve this. The challenge is there, but you need to work on it, and you need to work specifically with action on respective areas to achieve. Otherwise, the time will pass, the event that we dread will happen, and the society may be no more. So that is where the best practices and so on comes into play. For example, house standards. I take this one example, but just imagine if we can change our way of living into this scenario that I have placed. Every product and appliance is environmentally friendly. Every market item is fair trade, where corruption is a myth and poverty is a distant memory. And all of these have been addressed in SDGs under different numbers, under different headings. Just imagine environmentally friendly. So we should not be having some of the problems that we are talking about. The fair trade, we should not be having social disparities, the workplace and so on. It should be fine. We enjoy doing what we are doing. And corruption is a myth. There will be development and we can trust, and there will be the transparency. And we don't want poverty, and that is SDG 1. And we can look back and say, we did eradicate that. And some countries have shown in places that this is true. But then what about a standard? A standard that has been put in, ISO 20400, sustainable procurement, is expected really to believe in and contribute to all this in a way. But of course, you have lots more. I'm just taking an opportunity of a shared best practice that's available for us to look in, adapt, and say, look, this would bring these benefits. I mean, that's why these global standards have been taken up by national governments. The best practices, these understandings comes together on a global platform by sharing best practices from the individual countries and individual players who have contributed to this. Then it becomes a standard, which is an international standard. Then in turn influences other parties to accept them. And countries do accept now. And that is the story that I would like to mention. Taking us to this so that just to emphasize in our minds, this is possible and this we must do. And for all SDG 17s, it's interesting. Today, the nations are tracked on their SDG performance. Sri Lanka is also on the map. You go to an SDG tracker on the United Nations, and you will find the country performance. And our report card is also there. And what is interesting is, and what is the area that we are celebrating on this Standards Day, is how we have shared the best practices, basically enabling all SDGs to be supported. So we have templates which we can work on to move forward in realizing those goals that we have set ourselves as targets, the broad international standards, not to put the planet in peril. It's a huge responsibility, but of course we can also take it from society point, right? We must also look after our society, and we should have our development. We should not have poverty within us. That's important. So you see the templates are there. We can accept these things. We can try to place. We can place these things into our performance areas. So the point is, there are plenty of standards to act on. And we can learn from some areas and translate them into action. So we don't have to do some of the basic spade work. It's all there. And we can contribute. because we know sustainable development. We have done things in the past where we can proudly say we understood this issue of sustainability. And so we in turn can contribute to this. So the roadmap, the opportunities are clear. And I'm not going to dwell on each one of these things. I thought I will take it a more Sri Lankan way and ask the questions, why not the importance of standards and why we should embrace some of these things very fast, maybe in moving ourselves to the next level, while being conscious of the challenges in front of us. That's very interesting. That's why I said ISO in the very beginning in the title. And we all think ISO is an acronym, or maybe it's coming from this International Standards Organization. It's not. If you look at ISO, you see the English, International Organization for Standardization, you see the French, and it's very interesting, it comes from a Greek word. ISO is for equal. And this word equal has a big lesson for us, important lesson to us. That's why I try to position these two practices. Let's say I have a food factory in Sri Lanka. I have a food factory in Switzerland. Switzerland carries the #1 food industry in the world. Now, if I say I have practices that have been certified, where I can say, let's say ISO 9000 or ISO 22000, the food hygiene management standards, safety. Okay, if I am carrying that certification in a factory in Sri Lanka, and I see a similar factory in Switzerland, what I communicate is that what we are doing here and there are basically the same. That a person from anywhere, somewhere else, can look at us, look at Switzerland, and when you see this achievement or the practice and the standard being certified, we use the word conformity, and then what the picture that you present is that you give confidence, and as the word secretary mentioned, the trust. The trust and confidence are very important words in today's international trade and in acceptance, and we must elevate ourselves to that level. So you can see it's that very fundamental meaning from this Greek word that is used is ISO. To get our practices to one level, anywhere to anybody, we communicate and we say that we are doing the same thing. Of course, you can do better, but what is happening is the basics are of almost the world standard. That is the communication. And once we start communicating across the economy from whatever the activity, that means that we have changed ourselves, we have improved ourselves, and there is development. And of course, the point is we cannot afford to tread the path that probably 1960s or 70s some of the countries have adopted because of these challenges. So that's why we have now not just development, we have to pursue a path of sustainable development. And the same standards are there. And that's the power of this, the opportunity that we have from this shared vision, shared information, and so on. So I suppose this is important to understand this concept of ISO. There are a lot of standards. It was mentioned 1946 and 1951, the first standard came from there. But we have standard, this is a global standard body. And you can see the standards touch almost every aspect of our lives. And that was mentioned. And probably the way to understand the value is not when the life is going on well, but when these standards are missed. And many example was given by Dr. Siddiq, right? And unfortunately, you tend to realize it when things fail. Oh, I wish this is not like this. But when things are going on smoothly, we take it for granted. We don't see the seriousness or the importance of the application and the role they have played. But countries who have taken the role, and ISO is very important, they try to push it because we know we can still do better. And that challenge is there today. So ISO standards, for an example, you can give many country examples. I can't give for Sri Lanka yet, but that's another concept. I think we should do this. United Kingdom has an analysis which says they have put in, for one particular case, 2.5 billion sterling pounds to the economy. And what's more important is 13% improvement in labor productivity. Just imagine, okay, 2.5 billion GBP is probably a one-off input. But the 13% improvement in labor productivity is something that will continuously give results. Now, this is an evaluation of the application of standards to an economy, and the economy coming out and say, look, these are the benefits that we have had. It's of course very important that we have results, and the results are kind of pushes us to adopt more and go that extra mile and see the value. And that perhaps is something Sri Lanka is missing, because we have not looked at how much the standards have benefited. Of course, the secretary mentioned about his own company, and he said we went from a small company to a big company and a small player to a big player in their adoption after adopting the standards of the process. But do it nationally and think what more we can gain. And because it shows directly there's value in applying. And what is interesting is ISO has a procedure for calculating. ISO has a written down procedure for looking at economic standards, or looking at the economic contribution of standards. It's there. So there is a template for that too, right? Which we can look at. So it's important for us to understand, but just to highlight, we miss when we don't have it. But countries, those who have contributed to this more than some others, have faced events and they have realized and they have contributed. Let's take, for example, this event. This is considered a great fire in the sense because kind of like the city was basically finished. The Baltimore fire in the United States. And the problem, they finally realized at the same point, they realized because they were having this fire was spreading fast, 2 days of fire in this city in 1904. And they were getting firefighting carts and all that from neighboring areas and all that, but they came. They had water, they had probably ability to pump out, but what was problematic was the pipe connection, the hose connection to the hydrants were not possible because what came from a distance away was of a different diameter. So Baltimorean has basically put up their own hydrant and a diameter, and for their equipment was not sufficient to put out the fire. And they realized that this is not going to be the way forward. And you have a burned city to showcase the problems that they faced at that point. So in standard, you are talking about interoperability, right? And we talked about you have a plug, I go anywhere and I have a USB stick and I have the credit card. So I have this assurance it will work. But in this particular case, it was graphically demonstrated that the mistake of having your own way of doing things, and that's not going to be right. So these learnings, actually these lessons were used in. And you can also see some of the very powerful examples of adhering to standards. 1931, the New Zealand, you saw this effect of in a different area of a serious earthquake in New Zealand. And there was widespread destruction. Fast forward 2010 and 2011, some may remember in Christchurch, there was not just one big earthquake, there were several in 2 years. And the destruction was quite minimal. And one strong party that came forward and said, it worked. And what worked? Standards. And the New Zealand standards demonstrated what they have put in to ensure for disaster readiness really paid off. And the lives were not lost in that sense of many, and the destructions were different. And most were really withstood. And they were not small, like magnitude earthquakes. They were significant ones in the Christchurch area. So you can see the application of standards with an event in mind, which is precautionary, preparedness, and you know that it will work. And of course, when the event happens, you can test technically. The results were very good for New Zealand. So you can see the power of application. The question, are we making use of the standards, best use of the standards? I think we all can do better. That's the point I want to stress. For example, if you look at, because today there are so many, and even if you take a small food product like milk, globally we have about 185 plus standards for milk. And we sometimes argue quite a lot, but we don't push these standards and say, look, this is the way the industry is working. And if we have it, some of these lot of unnecessary arguments that we are having on the ground level in industry should not happen. Because we have got really good, excellent global practices and data and systems for us to look at and take decisions. And we say, we also practice this, we are fully aware of it and implement it. So I would say we are not making use of the standards very much, and it's up to us. And all the time these things are developing. So it's again, a day like this is a reminder for us to adopt and do better. And contribute ourselves as well. So if you look at the international standards from ISO alone, you are talking about 4,000 plus standards, international standards available in almost in every area. And you have 3 organizations there working together. Of course, in the early days, it was all manufacturing. Nuts and bolts, right? Manufacturing was the key. Thereafter, things went to management systems. And we have this ISO 9000 was a groundbreaking development. World's first management system, and how much it must have contributed to the changes that have been made and the improvements that have happened. And of course, now we have ISO 14000, which is the environmental management system. And you have ISO 22000, the food safety. We have lots more for energy management, safety, 45,000, 55,000, so on, so 50,000. So there are lots of the management systems have come in. And they have also been connected at high level to have kind of like, okay, you can work across. And these are very powerful tools. And it's not only for big players. We can work with small and medium, and even for micros. We can bring the discipline, and it's almost a global best practice. And you don't have to do it. You don't have to invent it. You have it there, and it's more of a learning and adaptation. And that's the beauty of it, because you're sharing those best practices. You don't want someone else to face the same mistake of Baltimore. The lessons are being learned from lessons are being taken and transferred across for others not to make those mistakes. So we have now on social responsibility and governance. So basically all elements of the society for decent quality living, we are having standards. I just want to take an example of something that we have to think about and to adopt things in a wider way and to think, let's look at what are the global best practices are, not rushing in to make our own immediately, because we know there are a lot out there. So I just take it as avoid killing our future. This is about toys. And some area I'm very happy to note that Sri Lanka Standards Institutes have started moving on this, have initiated work. It's very important, I would say, because it's about future. It's about our future in the children and the society. So let me explain what I mean by this. Something that happened as a result of our work after Sri Lanka signed the Stockholm, the global environmental management, we were looking at one area of plastics recycling. And if you have substandard plastic recycling, some of these material can end up as toys. And we saw these lots of toys coming into the country. And we were measuring, and we saw things like bromine in excessive quantities. And may would have come from, very likely come from recycled electronics and electrical materials, which have this material as a fire retardant and now being crossed into the toys. And what happens is a child takes the toy and puts it in the mouth, and these materials get in. So we should not have, we have to have the safety. And also when you look, you identified that in Sri Lanka, when we produce toys to the world, we have about few companies, maybe about 10 companies. They are of global standards because the European Union, and they really insist on standards. But when we bring toys to our children, we have no standards. So which is not right. And this is something we should think about. And as I said, it's happy to see SLSI working on it. I'll give you an example of what is identified. This was done in, now I mentioned as PBDE. It's a fire retardant chemical put into these rubber plastics. And all your electrical electronics will have. They are physically connected. They are not chemically bound. So they actually can get released. So what was identified in a study of American children is this prenatal PBD exposure. And they looked at IQ. Not a serious disease in a sense. They were looking at the intelligence. You know, in North America, IQ measurement is a very serious thing. And they identified that almost all the children they studied have had exposure to these mercury, lead, organophosphates, PCBs, BPA, PBDs. And I take this PBD for the toys. And they identified in the blood that children have this. And what they identified was having this somewhat a little bit, I mean, these are parts per billion. And there's an IQ drop that's been noted. And I'll show you the kind of like the final situation. In a society, we have a kind of like a bell curve where we say you have challenged group, we have a gifted group, and this is typically the stats of a normal distribution. Now, what happens is you will find that when this exposure will push the children, or the gifted will move away, may no longer be there in the society. And you can now understand the future of society is in peril. We expect that group to take us to the next level. And here you are putting them in jeopardy from day one. So that is why the global standards are available. Let's take ISO 8124 on safety of toys. And also something like ISO TS 2245, which actually addresses the cross-border transfer of second-hand goods. We know we bring second-hand stuff. And then we may not understand the full repercussions of some of these things that come in. So it's important to adopt these practices. And once the standards are in, we have a strong communication. That's something we should be thinking. That's important. So this is it's a very, very strong kind of experiment, research that has happened with children and IQ and the body burden. Body burden means the chemicals in the body, and showing the intelligence can drop. And when the intelligence drops in a society, the society is in peril. And we must realize, and our actions are actually contributing to this. So it's important that we look at these global best practices and ensure that our society, our children do not suffer from these exposures. So it's standards. Then again, look at the social responsibility. I look at this manufacturing examples were mentioned. Today we have on social responsibility, actually when the ISO was looking at it, it was all initially corporate social responsibility. And there was a question from one country, why do you think about corporate? Why don't you take it as social responsibility? So the corporate was dropped because CSR was a very, very common term where the corporates look at the society and act, but here the societal aspect was taken, social responsibility. So we have, and then we know they directly contribute to SDGs as well. So ISO 26000, countries have adopted this. Maybe we are talking about 80 plus countries in globally have adopted them as a national social responsibility standard. So we see that global best practices are adopted by nationally, and then nationally we say this is our national practice, and you communicate very strongly what you believe in and what your practices are going to be in line with a global best practice. That's very interesting. To give an example, now probably Sri Lanka has the most number of, if you take a unit area, the green apparel factories in the world. And when Marks and Spencer adopted this ISO, so you can adopt, the nations can adopt, corporates can adopt. So corporates adopted, example is like Marks and Spencer. When they adopted it, they had a plan A. They put into practice plan A, which was actually bringing in not just environmental responsibility, but that's also social responsibility in. And they look around because they looked around for their suppliers and they decided on Sri Lanka to have their plan A operation. And as a result, we know Sri Lanka had 2 factories in 2 institutions two big textile apparel manufacturers from Sri Lanka to have the Leeds Platinum, world's first, the Leeds Platinum factory. And happy to say that it has happened from, I mean, like we did it from locally in the sense, and so it's a plus. But you know, the thrust came from a company adopting ISO 26000 as a management standard, and then changing their practices, not inside their own country, but across the world. And interestingly, Sri Lanka, the benefited. So we have today lots of green apparel factories, and we have our green buildings and so on. So it's interesting to see. And we know the work environment in these factories are quite different. You like to work on, you like to come in, and it's fairly healthy also, the air quality, indoor air quality. So there are many features that actually transforms the work environment, thereby the people and how they work and how they live. So you send a very strong message about the ethos of that organization when you adopt these things. So 26,000, we can go on. Oh, that's what I want. And I'm very, very interested to highlight, because Sri Lanka at this stage seriously need this. And it was mentioned about the containers. So when Malcolm, a trucker, basically came up with the concept that revolutionizing the concept that goods not be transported, the container that the goods are in should be made more amenable to transport. The containerization started. And you know how much this is ordinary person, of course he was in the industry, coming up with an idea and then transforming shipping, other rail, road transport, intermodal transportation, and so on. And this is an idea that was put into practice. That's innovation. And we have to address what Munidasa Kumaratunga said long before even we had our independence. The nation which does not create new things will not rise. And it's very interesting, in the early days of the European Union, you had Oslo manual for tracking data. You had WIPO looking at how to get intellectual property securing. Now today, we have this brand new ISO for innovation management. In organizations, we know in Sri Lanka, most of our private sector organizations are not really innovation driven. They are risk averse, and they want to be shown by somebody has done it before them to be, which will not help us much, because we need to lead. And innovation is the way to do this. So here you have a template now available, even for looking at intellectual property securing, and how do you acquire data, and how you manage your innovation system within the organization. So let's see a big value, because this can drive in so many fronts the way you do things. And for our economy, this, I would say, is a very, very critical standard now for the organizations to adopt and change and bring this. So again, the standards have come in and giving us exactly. And I remember seeing, listening recently to the Honorable Minister, there was the Sri Lanka forms committee to supervise blockchain and cryptocurrency. Of course, this is kind of like the thing, right? We hear so much and we have a lot of news, but internally we don't experience much. Some work has happened with banking transactions in Sri Lanka too. Right, so here you can see that companies have come in for first Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and the tourism has been looked at, an opportunity space for doing this. And you can see Indian government is actually, state is working with IIT Madras on bringing electronic voting using blockchain. So, you know, blockchain is a software mechanism running, I mean, like on top of the internet and giving security, confidence, and so on. So it's an interesting new technology that's available and can permeate in many areas. So maybe the blockchain is going to be the change agent. Cryptocurrency has pluses and minuses and a lot of discussions on that. But the background to that, the basics of the blockchain have this ability to do. Again, you see ISO TC 307, so having this. So if Sri Lanka is working on it, why not we look at quite fast these global best practices that are coming through, and we actually make very good, healthy step forward in positioning ourselves by working with and using this knowledge straight away, and then having our own contribution. So ISO 20001 is for information security management. So we know the importance of information, the data. So, so again, there are broad management standards have come in for information security. So you can see for technology, for organizational management, even national management, the role the standards have been coming out. And you can see the mistakes that were made. I kind of give an example. Interestingly, this happens in 1999. Can't even imagine United States having this issue. They had this Mars climate orbiter, and you had two organizations, NASA and another private outsourced engineering company. And it was interesting to note, the engineering company was using imperial units. We know in America that they didn't really standardize units. So they were using all sorts of units. And even if you take a simple barrel, they have a US barrel and a UK barrel, right? But the NASA was using metric. But the two parties who were communicating about the development, they were exchanging numbers, but they were not sharing the units. So when unfortunately near Mars, when the unit was released, it simply crashed. It's burnt, right? Simply because they were communicating on meters and feet, so to speak. And this made a huge difference, because one's understanding of this distance was completely different from one's who has done it. And it's a simple case of units being mistakenly communicated in the wrong way because there was no standard. They failed to adhere to a common standard. So simple, but yet it's in 90s. So you can see these things can happen. That's why the importance of understanding the standards value. And this is very important because we are talking about Industry 4 coming in. We can't escape from Industry 4, and we should not. But we should not be just subservient to that situation. We should be also really an equal player. That's what I expect, the concept of ISO, right? The Greek words, we play equal, and that's important. But then to play equal, we need to understand how to do that. So we are entering into this era of network devices, and we used to say the word smart. The word smart means always will be connected. And of course, when you are connected, you have your own additional inherent risks, right? I may have to see when I buy a piece of equipment, whether it's hackable. Now, what's my response for cybersecurity? What if? So do I bring those concepts into my procurement process? And what if this happens? So again, you find in line with technology and innovation and the development, the standards have also moved in. And you have standards for IoT, right? You have ISO 30141, you have the ISO 31000 for the risk management. And it's interesting, ISO 31000 for risk management has been accepted by about 40 plus countries as their national risk management standard. And if we are to look at communicate, Sri Lanka has a lot less risk, and we know what risks are. We understand risk management is, and we have set in place risk management. So your starting place is obviously a document like or a system like ISO 31000. A national adaptation of a 31000 will actually communicate. Remember, we are talking about how to overcome this ease of doing business going up, and we are challenging ourselves, and even including the Global Innovation Index. Things like how many companies are ISO 14000 certified is a parameter in Global Innovation Index. And we know in ISO 14000, there are challenges by our industry not really jumping to embrace that. So we are lagging. So here another one with the new technologies, ISO 31000. We demonstrate the risk management is taken care of. We have a standard, we set in place, we validate it, and we demonstrate our adherence to the best practices. And then we embrace technology and we also contribute. We know we can contribute in these things. We are quite powerful in communications. We have a lot of innovations taking place in communications. We just had the World Prize coming into University of Moratuwa in the communication signal processing, world's first. So you see these things happen, but to really embed these developments and embed them to our economic gain, we need to have these management practices also in. The challenges need to be addressed. Again, we do a lot of medical devices, and this is an area that has been looked into in robotics, the soft robotics, but Sri Lanka can work on because of our strength in textile industry. Exoskeletons, the concept came from nature, from a Goma kuruminia, basically the rhinoceros beetle. And we have these medical devices standards coming from the ISOs, like 13485. And we know sometimes it takes a long time in Sri Lanka to do some of these development, the certifications. And one can work on these best practices very quickly. And this is why you can see Professor Sankai here from Japan. Now, these are devices that are saying 0 to basically making wheelchair a thing of the past. And not only these things are medical devices, like Koreans are adopting these things in their workplaces to improve the work, the practices of their labor force, because you can now lift 250% times of your weight. And Korean dockyards, for example, have demonstrated their productivity has gone by some of these additions. So even though it looks like a medical device, they are completely devices to be creative and applied across the society in many ways. But you need standards. And these are also smart devices in some areas, right? So that means you have to be networked and you have communication. So Professor Sankai observes the patients in Germany because Japanese hire these exoskeletons for hospitals in Germany, because this is a lead area in research in Japan. So you see they monitor from distance and there's a lot of communication. So we need another standards, as I was mentioning about 31,000. And then again, communicating about the country. World Bank says that there's about USD 1.5 trillion, it's an enormous amount, paid as bribes globally each year. And then again, ISO has come forward for anti-bribery management systems. You have organizations, you have nations. For example, Singapore and Peru are examples of countries who have adopted ISO 37000. And by that adoption, you demonstrate your keenness, your willingness to change and to ensure that we communicate positively. And this is a very important element for foreign direct investment to bring in. Then you have companies like Microsoft, Google, which is really seriously stating how these things have benefited. You have case studies from these companies on using. And it's very interestingly, even adaptations like quality management systems, like 54,000 coming up in the technical standards for electoral organizations at all levels of government, right? So you can see how even the democracy, the governance, has been put into a world's best practice and standardized. So you have these very interesting examples that are available. And we can actually leapfrog in some way. You don't have to do some of the basics. And these are not just basics, these are applied, discussed, implemented, results to be seen, examples. So you can actually transform your system. So for that, we need to act on these. So on a final notes, I just want to mention this. It's a very interesting comment poster that comes from the it's really the beginning of the Second World War in UK. They found this poster later in a bookshop, secondhand bookshop. The message from the British government to the people in 1939 was keep calm and carry on. And they found this poster, and it's led to a kind of like, it became a hit, considering the times, it went viral of sort. And the concept of business continuity. And today in this COVID times, we hear a lot of discussions about how to make our businesses. And we see businesses didn't have much contingency plans, specifically like a COVID-19, which is a black swan event. There were no contingency planning at all, right? Whether it's private or public, we face these difficulties. But again, to think of high risk, these scenarios, you have again standard like ISO 22301, which is on standards for how to come up with a business continuity plan. And of course, when initially the tech met in this case of ISO, this was, they identified it as civil defense in line with this poster. But later on, it was changed to like societal security, much more of an important mission, societal security, and how societies become secure. How do you have contingency? And once you have contingency, you bring resilience. And you have the plans in place, you have plans in place to manage scenarios, and then the impact of like an issue is not going to be so much dramatic as we have witnessed across the world today. So again, a standard that's available for us to look in. And these things go across not just big players, it's to the small, medium as well. I just want to stress something. We try to connect with Sri Lanka Standards Institute. We had the Express Pearl incident. It's not an incident, it's really a disaster now. We quickly changed the word from incident investigation to an accident, and we have identified. So we are looking at the damage assessment. And it's very interesting when you go into an international scenario situation, they stressed on adherence to standards. I take a very simple para. It says that if you want to submit the claims and sampling terms, the recording of fundamental data on pro forma in sheets for each station, GPS, data, time, coding, observations, cross-examination from other sources, all need to be looked into and will be really recorded. Something that ISO 9000 really thrust on you to ensure the record keeping and ensure continued understanding from when the variations are done. So up to today, it's about 149 days. So we are looking at things with SLSI, connecting to the labs on this stuff, and for Express Pearl, we're directly looking at how to do this. And probably this type of linkages are very important in this transformation to get standards. So things like ISO 16665 and ISO 15314, because this has not only chemicals, this has plastics, world's worst plastic load and a disaster, and including chemicals on board. So combine that, it's went to it's the worst disaster from a cargo ship. And then not just ISO, we are looking at even ASTM standards, because some of them have in different standardization standards agencies. So you see the relevance. If we have to communicate, our communication also need to be accepted in this global village. We know globalization is not something that we can argue on. It's happening. So we need to have this working to that. And then they look at this adherence to for us to adhere to those as well, to acknowledge what you have done is right. Otherwise, we will find we have done the hard work, but nobody is going to accept it outside. So it's not just international trade. I mean, even this is a classic situation we are looking at to have the best practices built in to ensure that we do this. So we need to understand the relevance and how do we have standards being connected to the rest of the organizations across. So hopefully the SLSI has a much more larger role in advocacy, bringing the availability of standards to the attention of each and individual, whether it's public institution or a private institution. That's important because you know more about it and you are more connected to it. And we stand to benefit by accessing that information. And if you're proactive in that communication, we can actually solve our problems better. And nationally, we really should plan to have standards in place, like the adaptation, to communicate that yes, Sri Lanka is using these practices, so we can be trusted and you can be confident about what we are doing. So it's finally, I just want to start with Demin's comment, because we are also celebrating quality, and Demin really was basically ignored in the United States. And he went to Japan after the war, and he saw the starving people on the railway stations in Tokyo. And what he brought was quality thinking, adherence to quality, and this information in variation. I won't go into detail, that's another thing. I kind of make these mandatory readings, Demin's biography, this chapter to the students when I teach TQM. The reason being, this is transformation of a nation. He single-handedly, in a way, communicated the importance of standards and the qualities specifically, and transformed the Japanese industry. And later on, US was asking, what do you mean by this? And he was searched, and you know, the award comes from Japan, in honor of him, the Demin Award, right? And so Made in Japan became a big thing. And today, of course, we talk about made in the world because we are trying very desperately to plug into the global value chains and so on. But that's not easy if you don't understand this connectivity comes through the standards, adherence, and so on. So if we do this well, we can have design and made in Sri Lanka really applicable, and really the Demin only demonstrated, and he was himself says he was surprised how Japan changed in just 10 years. And it was even less than 10 years that the people change. He was addressing his transformating agents was the Union of Scientists and Engineers in Japan, who are actually the industry leaders. And they were very keen to see that Japan bounced back from the Second World War after 2 nuclear bombs. And, you know, they took his concepts of quality and the standardization very seriously. And we know rejects are not a word in Japanese, right? And so you have a lot of comments about somebody asking, okay, 1% reject rates and things like that. In Japan, they don't believe in it. So this is made by, but interestingly, not by Japanese, but by an American citizen, because he was not really valued in US, but he went and transformed Japan and thereby transformed the rest of the world in a way a lesson was made in. So another lesson to be taken at this stage, while we look at the shared vision and for growth, is just to save the climate, yes, but we must also have the importance of transforming ourselves to a developed nation. And the point is the standards do offer a fantastic opportunity because of the sharing of world-class best practices as a document, as a roadmap, we can embed them. So those are my thoughts. Again, yes, as we celebrate, and I thank again the Sri Lanka Standards Institute for the invitation extended, and thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ajit Dialvis, for delivering this valuable, informative speech on sustainable development for a better world through standards, even with your busy schedules. I hope definitely it was an interesting session to you. Now I call upon Mrs. Ipsita Jayasekara, Director, Scientific Standards of SLSI, to conduct her presentation on the topic of Standards for Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you. Greetings to all. I'm Ipsita Jayasekara, Director of the Scientific Standards Division of SLSI. Today my topic is Standards for Sustainable Development Goals. To ensure this topic, we have to see what is a national standard and role of SLSI. National standard is a document established by consensus and approved by a recognized body in the country. The recognized body in Sri Lanka is the SLSI. All the national standards are authorized by the Council of SLSI prior to publishing. The first national standard was published by SLSI as a Ceylon standard in 1967. The national standards are formulated by 2 divisions of SLSI. Those are Scientific Standards Division and the Engineering Standards Division. At present, there are more than 100 working groups and 11 sectoral committees approved by the Council of SLSI. When formulating standards, the policy of SLSI is harmonize or align with the international standards and follow best standardization practices and guidelines. SLSI adopt international standards and publish as Sri Lanka Standards, and also SLI formulates national standards through participatory, transparent and consultative process with the involvement of interested parties. I would like to express my gratitude to all who contributed to formulate the national standard, especially chairmen and members of all sectoral committees, experts and working group members, and all who share comments for improvement of standards. When a standard is formulated, we call it as a specification, and standards are of different types: guidelines, test methods, code of practices, vocabulary, symbols, management systems. The published standards are reviewed, revised or amended from time to time. Now we are paying attention to the sustainable development goals. You know that 17 sustainable development goals or global goals were set up in year 2015 by the United Nations General Assembly. These global goals designed to be a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. There are 169 targets intended to be achieved by the year 2030. And one important way of achieving the targets is application and implementation of the standards. These 17 goals are connected one to another or many. Now, due to limited time, I'm going to explain you by selecting only goal 2 and goal 12, that is zero hunger and responsible consumption. And my colleague, Mr. Fernando, will explain about goal 7 and goal 13. Now we have to think why standards are important to achieve the targets of sustainable development goals and how the standards help efficient implementation of sustainability goals. Because standards provide effective tools to face the challenge. Now this colorful picture of ISO shows about the current areas of human being and needs for people. Though the letters are not very clear, I can mention some of the concerned areas. Those are water quality, road safety, food safety, safety of toys, wastewater disposal, and products for elderly persons. So we can say that the standards are applicable to all needs of people. Now let us take the goal 2, that is end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. The current estimates show that nearly 690 million people are hungry, or 8.9% of the world population. That is up by 10 million people in 1 year and by nearly 60 million in 5 years. So these are the few targets of this goal. That is by 2030 to end hunger and ensure access by all people, in particular the poor and people in vulnerable situations, including infants, to save nutritious and sufficient food all year round. Then by 2030 to ensure sustainable food production systems and implement resilient agricultural practices that increase productivity and production, that help maintain ecosystems, that strengthen capacity for adaptation to climate change, extreme weather, drought, flooding, and other disasters, and that progressively improve land and soil quality. In connection to promote sustainable agriculture, SLSI introduced several national standards on good agricultural practices. Those are GAP. One is SLS 1523 Part 1, published in year 2016. The objective of that standard is sustainable production of fruits and vegetables that is legally compliant, environmentally sound, socially acceptable, economically viable, to ensure quality produce that is suitable for consumption. Now there are GAP standards for rice, cinnamon, pepper, coffee, cocoa, nutmeg, and cloves. So in addition to that, some standards are already published related to organic agriculture and compost. SLS 1324, published in 2018, organic agriculture production and processing. This is used for the certification purposes. And also there are standards for the compost made from municipal solid waste and also made from raw materials of agricultural origin. Very recently, SLS had published 2 standards, SLS 1702 that is on liquid organic fertilizers. Another one is 1700 for sterilized solid organic fertilizer. Currently, new standard is being formulated for biofertilizers. You know that an estimated 2 billion people in the world did not have regular food to save nutritious and sufficient food in 2019. To ensure quality and safety of food, more than 500 national standards are available for food products and commodities. Now, you can download free the Sri Lanka Standard Catalog, the soft copy 2021, to get all information on published standard from the official website of the SLSI. Now, I am mentioning about only few standards at the moment. One important standard is SLS 633, issued in this year. It is Sri Lanka Standard Specification for Milled Rice. It is recently revised to introduce safety parameters. Then SLS 1701 Part 1, issued very recently. It is a specification for Kitul Triakal and it is unique to Sri Lanka. Now there are more than 100 code of practice standards, but only 4 have been listed here. It is the code of practice for application of pesticide, code of practice for storage of cereals and pulses, and also code of practice for coconut kernel processing and for fresh leafy vegetables. Then international food safety related standards have been adopted by SLSI as national standards and used for certification purposes. The most common standard is SLSI ISO 22000 2018, that is food safety management systems requirement for any organization in the food chain, and SLS 1266, Sri Lanka standard requirement for a hazard-based food safety management systems. Those are also used for the certification purposes. Then when we move to the goal 12, it is responsible consumption and production. It is by 2020 to achieve the environmentally sound management of chemicals and also waste throughout their life cycle in accordance with agreed international frameworks and significantly reduce their release to air, water and soil in order to minimize their adverse impact on human health and the environment. Then by 2030, substantially reduce waste generation throughout prevention, reduction, recycling and reuse. Then by 2030, half per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. So these are few standards connected to this goal 12. Very interesting standard is SLS 1718, published in 2021, that is Sri Lanka Standard Specification for Compostable Wood Wrapping Sheets. And some standards have been, ISO standards have been adopted in the plastic area. That is SLSI ISO 23891. It is on plastic recycling and recovery. SLSI ISO TR 21960 is plastic environmental aspects. SLS 1706 is plastics, carbon and environmental footprint of bio-based plastic. Part 3, process carbon footprint requirements and guidelines for qualifications. And also 22766 is plastic, determination of the degree of integration of plastic materials in marine habitats under real field conditions. Finally, I can say that sustainable development ensure economic growth, environmental integrity, and societal equity. With that, I conclude my brief session. Thank you.
Standards in Sri Lanka Standards Institution. In my brief presentation, I have selected two important Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and related important Sri Lanka standard for these SDGs. SDG number 7, affordable and clean energy. This is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. The main series of standards related to SDG 7 is Energy Management System Standards. That is ISO 50,000 series of standards. Under this ISO 50,000 series, the main standards is ISO 50,001, Energy Management Systems Requirement with Guidance for Use. We have adopted this standard as a Sri Lanka standard, and we have certified number of organizations against this standard. To support these main standards, there are a number of other standards we have adopted. SLSI ISO 50003, Energy Management Systems Requirement for Bodies Providing Audit and Certification of Energy Management Systems. This standard is for certification bodies. SLSI ISO 50004, Energy Management Systems Guidance for the Implementation of an ISO 50001 Energy Management Systems. This standard is to provide the organization implementing energy management systems as per ISO 50001 standard. Next, we have SLSI ISO 50009 Energy Management Systems Guidance for Implementing a Common Energy Management System in multiple organizations. In some situations, better energy management results can be achieved when several organizations work together to manage their energy collectively by forming an energy management group. Another very important standards related to SDG 7 is energy efficiency standards. In this area, we have developed number of Sri Lanka standards, SLS 1625, energy efficiency rating for double cap tubular fluorescent lamps. This is for tube lights. SLS 1225 energy efficiency rating for self-balanced integral type compact fluorescent lamps for general lighting services. This is for CFL bulbs. SLS 1600 energy efficiency rating for electric ceiling fans and regulators. SLS 1230 energy efficiency rating for household refrigerators and freezers. When we consider SDG 7, minimum energy performance standards plays a vital role. In this area, we have developed SLS 1690, minimum energy performance for household refrigerators, SLS 1580, minimum energy performance for computers, and SLS 1530, minimum energy performance self-balanced integral type LED lamps for general lighting services. These days, this is a very important standard as the use of LED bulbs become heavily increasing. Solar energy related standards directly contribute to SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. There are a large number of solar energy related standards have been developed, and we have listed few important standards here. SLS 1522, Sri Lanka Standard Code of Practice for Grid-Connected Photovoltaic Power Systems, requirements for system documentation, installation, testing and commissioning. This is a code of practice for installation, testing and commissioning of grid-connected solar systems. SLS 1544, Sri Lanka Standard Specification for Terrestrial Photovoltaic Modules, Design Qualification and Type Approval. This standard is for solar panel design qualification and type approval. SLS 1553, Sri Lanka Standard Specification for Photovoltaic Module Safety Qualifications. This is to ensure the safety qualification of solar panels. SLS 1543, Sri Lanka Standard Specification for Safety of Power Converters for use in photovoltaic power systems. This standard is for the safety of inverters used in solar system. And also SLS 1542, Sri Lanka Standard Specification for Electric Cables for Photovoltaic Systems. SDGs number 13, Climate Action. This is to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. The main series of standards related to SDG 13, climate action, is environmental management standards. That is ISO 14000 series of standards. Under this ISO 14000 series, the main standard is ISO 14001, Environmental Management Systems, requirement with guidance for use. We have adopted this standard as a Sri Lanka standard, and we have certified large number of organizations against this standard. In this ISO 14000 family of standards, we have SLS ISO 14004, Environmental Management Systems, General Guidelines on Implementation. This provides the guideline to implement EMS in an organization. SLS ISO 14006, Environmental Management Systems, Guidelines for Incorporating Eco-Design. This provides guidelines for the organization to include environmental consideration in design and development of their products. Another very important standards related to SDG 13 is ISO 14064 series greenhouse gas related standards. In this area, we have adopted ISO 14064 Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3 as Sri Lanka standards. I conclude my presentation and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fernando, for giving an awareness on sustainable development goals. Now, the session is open to questions and answers related to the topic. If you want to express your ideas, questions relevant to the topic, this is the time for you. You can text on our chat box. Mrs. Samanthi Narangoda, Deputy Director General of SLSI, will be conducted the session now onwards.
Thank you, Nilupa. There are few questions in the chat box. The first one is to our DG, Dr. Siddhika, that you said that economic growth in a country is directly related to the number of standards that are being used at a given time. How many standards published by SLSI right now, and how much roughly you think used by the country? Over to you, DG.
Thank you very much. That's a good question. I have to say, we have Sri Lanka standards have about 4,000 standards so far, but I had to admit that is not at all enough. We need at least 10,000 standards to, if the country to use them. So what I did was now recently from last year, we launched this drive to increase the number of standards formulated as well as number of standards adopted. Mainly a lot of system standards we started adopting to achieve the 10,000 standards goal. I think our keynote speaker, Professor Adit, is always pushing us to adopt standards. So I'm sure he will be very happy with our new drive. So last year itself, we increased the number of standards by 30%. Now, even this year, even amidst raging pandemic, even this year, we have so far achieved our goal. So hopefully we will be able to adapt and formulate standards to reach 10,000 goal. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. And there is another question. Also, I think you can answer to this question also. As an institution responsible for standards, what kind of initiatives you have taken in this COVID-19 pandemic situation?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I think this COVID pandemic is something that was new to everybody. Nobody knew what's going on and things like that. And to that, we as SLSI, we faced it like, first of all, we formulated the standard for sanitizers. That is, for the virus, we needed a special standard. Not all the sanitizer standards were usable for this pandemic. So within 2 weeks or so, we use an emergency method and formulated this sanitizer standard. And also we adopted a lot of ISO standard for ventilators. Not only that, now the pandemic came to Sri Lanka in March. By April, upon a request from Rotary, we started formulating a system standard to stop the spread within an entity. So this also came into effect in May 2000 last year. And that is mainly to give a certification. That is like a third-party assurance for the companies. Now, this is a little beyond the guidelines. So this is standard. So when you have a certification, there are a lot of benefits for the company, for the consumers, stakeholders. First of all, if it gives employees assurance that they are coming to work in a safe environment, and that builds confidence for them to come to work as well. And also it gives customers, clients, stakeholders confidence to come to the entity, the organization or the company. And the last one is, with this, within an organization, it stops the spread. So you can get a positive patient, but he or she will not spread it to anybody else within that entity. So this was really useful. So far, there are about 185 companies adopted this standard. So I think it is very useful if other companies also can adapt it, because we can't be assured that this pandemic has really stopped. We had to still take precautions. So this is like a precautionary standard to prevent the spread. Thank you.
Thank you, DG. Thank you. And there's another question. What are the initiatives taken to promote standards in small and medium scale industrialists. So I will answer to that question. Actually, SLSI conducts several awareness programs, the promotional programs by Standards and Services Division. And in addition to that, SLSI coordinate with several ministries also conduct awareness programs among SMEs and industrialists, especially focusing on small and medium scale entrepreneurs. Okay, so far we have received only those questions. So if you have any questions, now it's time.
Thank you, Mrs. Narangoda. Now we decided to wind up the Q&A session due to the limited time frame. I hope you all have satisfied with the answers given by the panel of experts. Thank you, Mrs. Narangoda, for conducting the Q&A session. It is my pleasure to invite Mrs. Samanthi Narangoda, Deputy Director General of SLSI, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Nilupa. Honorable Namal Rajapaksha, Minister of Youth and Sports, Minister of Development Coordination and Monitoring, and the State Minister of Digital Technology and Entrepreneur Development, Mr. Jayantha Silva, Secretary to the Ministry of Technology, all senior officials representing the ministries, Dr. Nihal Jayathilaka, Chairman of SLSI, Dr. Siddhikaji Senaratne, Director General, CEO of SLSI, members of Council of SLSI, heads of state and private sector organizations, management and staff of SLSI, our keynote speaker today, Professor Ajit Alvis, and distinguished participants. Good morning to all of you. It is a privilege for me to deliver the vote of thanks at this memorable event organized by the Sri Lanka Standards Institution to celebrate the World Standards Day 2021. As you know, the World Standards Day is annually celebrated on the 14th of October with the aim of augmenting awareness among regulators, industry, and consumers on the importance of standardization. Sri Lanka Standards Institution, SLSI, the Sri Lankan partner to International Organization for Standardization, ISO, conducts this webinar to make a platform to memorize and promulgate the importance of standardization in enhancing the mutual reliability of each other. Honorable Minister, my sincere gratitude for your presence and delivering a remarkable speech to grace this event, even with your busy schedule. Thank you very much, sir. My special thank goes to Mr. Jayantha Silva, Secretary to our ministry. Your valuable thoughts are enlightening us. Thank you very much, sir. Professor Ajit Alvis, sir, you are one of our foremost stakeholders, serving many committees of SLSI as the chairman or a member and provided technical guidance to SLSI. The theme of 2021 is Shared Vision for a Better World. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, represent our shared vision for peace and prosperity for people and the planet. Through the excellent speech that you delivered as the keynote speaker, you enlighten all the participants on how the national and international standards contribute to achieve sustainable development goals. Thank you very much, sir, for your very informative presentation. My special thanks goes to Dr. Nihal Jayathilaka, our chairman, who delivered the welcome address, and also to Dr. Siddhikaji Senaratne, our Director General, CEO, who provided an introduction to the webinar. I reciprocate my gratitude for both of you for the guidance and unstinted support extended right throughout to organize this event successfully. Mrs. Ipsita Jayasekara, Director Scientific Standards, and Mr. Sunanda Fernando, Director Engineering Standards, gave you an insight on how do standards contribute to achieve SDGs. Thank you very much for both of you for the descriptive presentations. My special thanks goes to management and staff of SLSI for their cooperation and contribution to carry out this event effectively. I wish to extend my sincere thanks for the staff of Standards and Services Promotion Division of SLSI for their tremendous effort to make this event a success. And my special tribute to the IT team of SLSI. This event would not have been successful if not for the support of the IT team. Thank you very much, Mr. Kanchana and your team. I thank Mrs. Nilupa Kakulandare for her role as the moderator of this webinar. Dear participants, I wish to mention that this webinar would not have been a reality if not for your presence. Thank you very much for your participation. Last but not least, I thank all who contributed to make this event successful. World Standards Day is a global celebration of the power of standardization. Standards touch almost every part of our daily lives. So, please join hands with SLSI to achieve sustainable development goals, focusing on economic growth, social equity, and environmental growth of the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Samanthi Naranguda, Deputy Director General of SLSI, for delivering the vote of thanks. This brings to an end of the virtual session. I hope you all have gained a great knowledge on the theme Standards for Sustainable Development Goals throughout this webinar. We will wind up today's program until we meet at the next celebration. Good luck, stay safe, and have a nice day.